Hi everyone, welcome to the Ronnie Perez podcast, episode number 2. This is part 2 of our 3-part series from Daniel to Darius. Hi everyone, welcome to the Ronnie Perez podcast. Here we are, episode 2 from Daniel to Darius in our 3-part series here. Again, thank you guys for all of your support. A lot of good questions coming in through direct message on Facebook and YouTube. So I'm going to try to answer those for you guys today. But I'm really excited to be here again. Episode 2 of the Ronnie Perez podcast. Thanks for joining me. So one of the questions was, who is Xenophon? Who is Herodotus? Well, Xenophon was a soldier, Greek soldier who fought in some battles during the Greek wars, the mercenary type of deal. And he was fascinated by the histories of this, and he wrote a history of the area based off of primary sources, based off of things that he saw, and also based off some of the tales that he heard, stuff like that. And Herodotus, kind of the same deal. He grew up when the Spartan War was now, the Spartan and Greek engagement at Thermopylae was kind of popular culture. He grew up in that time, a couple hundred years from now, and from when we are in our story, and he wrote about those stories and stuff like that after the fact. So that's who Herodotus is and Xenophon. Today we're going to go over where we left off, which was the Assyrian Empire. We started off in episode 1 in around 700 BCE. Now we're at about 586 BCE, so that's kind of where we're at now with the fall of Judah. Today we're going to cover Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel's prophecies, and the 3 youths that kind of go along with Daniel. So again, we're here. Nebuchadnezzar has just taken Judah, Jerusalem. He's enslaved all of the Jews. This is around 586 BCE. He takes Daniel back with him, all the nobility, which is a very common practice. You just take over a place, take all the gold, take all the people, and you move them over where you're at, and they're kind of your slaves. He also brought with him Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who the Bible uses by their Jewish names at the beginning, but mostly by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these youths were kind of nobility, aristocratic, and they came with Daniel there. So again, taking of Judah was prophesied 50 years prior. Remember that battle of Sennacherib, where we talked about it in part 1, where he lays siege to Jerusalem, destroys kind of the city, but around, but he can't get into the temple. Remember, and then he ends up not being able to stay because the Lord killed most of his men, and they were taken back by disease, and plague went back over to Assyria. That guy. Well, before that happened, King Hezekiah was kind of in league with one of these Assyrian princes to kind of take one over on Sennacherib. And he let one of the Assyrian princes let his people go into the stores, into the armory, into the temple. And Isaiah tells him, "What are you doing? What are you showing them?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm showing them all of our stuff." "Well, what have you shown them?" "Well, the armory and the riches and the gold and temple." And he goes, "Dude, these are our enemies." And then he gives them a prophecy and says, "Your time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord." He says that. And King Hezekiah's response was kind of like, at least it isn't me. At least my people at least my people are safe now. It'll be them. And he kind of plays that game, which is kind of messed up. But again, this was prophesied way before. So we're going to go into Daniel chapter 2 here. So here, Daniel chapter 2, we see kind of the prophecy of the statue, or the dream of the statue. Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 verse 1, he has all these dreams, right? He always has these dreams. But in chapter 2 is the first dream that he has. And he calls the magicians, he calls the astrologers, he calls the fortune tellers, and all these people, the sorcerers and whatnot, of his empire. And he goes, "Guys, I've had a dream." And they go, "All right, tell us a dream." And he goes, "No, I'm not. You tell me the dream, Because if I tell you the dream, you're going to tell me whatever garbage you're going to make up. No, I want you to tell me the dream and the interpretation. And as people are like, oh God, we can't do that. So Nebuchadnezzar pretty much says, if you can't do it, all right, I'm going to cut you into pieces and burn your homes. But if you can do it, chapter 6, he says, or verse 6, he says, I will give you honor and reward and leadership positions. So what do? They kind of freak out and they go back to their area. After a while, they can't do it, and the king decides to kill them all. Daniel hears of this, okay, in verse 17, chapter 2, verse 17. He hears of this, and he gets the three youths together, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those three youths with Daniel end up fasting and praying, and God gives Daniel a revelation of what the dream is. Now, the dream is basically that Nebuchadnezzar sees a giant figure, the head of gold, the breast of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and he sees the feet of clay and iron. Then he sees a giant rock that comes and destroys all of it. That's pretty much the dream, right? Now, when he goes to the king says, Daniel, do you have a dream for me? Belshazzar, which is his name, Belshazzar. And he goes, yes, this is your dream. He tells him the dream. And then the king says, great, what's it mean? And now we get into what that prophecy means, which is really pretty interesting. What it says is, in verse 39, it says, another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you. Before that he says, you are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall rise up after you. And yet a third kingdom of bronze shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these other kingdoms. Then you see the feet and toes are partly made of potter's clay and iron, so the feet and toes are iron and clay. And just as you saw that they were mixed with soft clay, this kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. And you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix one another in marriage. And in the days of those kings, God in heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another, and never be conquered. Right? And that out of nowhere, it says here that a mountain made of no human hand, or a stone from a mountain, will come through and crush the rest of the kingdoms. So Daniel lived in the time of Babylon, which is now what the kingdom that he's kind of referring to. You are the head, the gold head of Babylon, which goes from about 605 to 539 BCE, about 500 years and 39 years before Christ, right? Babylon. Then a kingdom inferior to his will come, which is the breast of silver. That's the other kingdom that's going to come, right? And this kingdom is what we call the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, Daniel would have lived through the Medo-Persian Empire in his lifetime. Okay, he would have lived through the Medo-Persian Empire in his lifetime. So he could have been writing that. But there's no way Daniel knew about the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. So again, we're kind of taking these prophecies from the year 2017 or even before, and we're kind of giving that prophecy its characters. Now, Daniel doesn't give the prophecy the characters that I'm going to give you now. We believe that the head of gold is Babylon. It took over the Assyrian Empire, we talked in the part 1, and it ruled from Egypt to the Median Empire, and Caraxes was actually Nebuchadnezzar's father-in-law. So they kind of had an alliance there. Now the Medo-Persian Empire, took over the Babylonian Empire, would rule from North Africa to Macedonia and India. So we're going to get into the Medo-Persian Empire in part 3. But it's the greatest empire till its time. So that would be that second empire that he talks about. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise. Now, why does it say inferior? Because the Medo-Persian Empire was the biggest kingdom, way bigger than Babylon and Assyria. I think it's inferior because, again, we're going from a religious point of view, because the work that Nebuchadnezzar did to bring the northern kingdom of Israel into submission, to kind of punish the northern kingdom of Israel, and the work the Babylonians did to punish the northern kingdom of Israel was God's work. I believe. And the Medo-Persian Empire did not do as much of God's work as Nebuchadnezzar did with the Babylonian Empire. Even though he was a horrible guy, God used him for certain things, such as bringing about prophecies, and he used him to bring about the prophecy of the northern kingdom being destroyed and to bring back punishment to his people for the crimes they committed against him. So that's why we think it's inferior, because it's inferior in its usage by the Lord, not in its total dominance. Okay. Now we go on to the other kingdom, the kingdom of that was the kingdom of silver, Medo-Persian, kingdom of bronze, which is the Grecian kingdoms. Now Greece, again, starting with Philip of Macedon, even before that, with the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans, the Athenians, they kind of joined together. We'll cover this in part 3. But Philip of Macedon would unite them, would build a kingdom. Alexander would take that kingdom and run with it, okay, and conquer most of the known world. And he would take the empire from the Persians. That's Greece, the thighs of bronze. Then we have the legs of iron, Rome, which rules from 168, its incorporation, until 476 AD, the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, Rome would dominate and unite the leaders of Italy into one of the most dominant forces the world's ever seen to this day. There's never going to be a kingdom like Rome, and there hasn't been one since. Rome is crazy as far as its land, usage, its dominion over the world. And we see that pretty much Rome is those legs of iron, strong, it will crush, right? Then we go into the feet of clay. That's kind of a divided world. That's kind of where we look at modern times, from 476 to today, where it says that it's partly weak, partly firm. They get together through marriages, through political marriages, alliances, stuff like that. The world's pretty much mixed now. There's no one place or another. It's kind of all mixed. So you have immigrants from all over the world. They come to every part of the world, and they kind of mix and travel. And we have this global economy. It's kind of weak, because if you look at Greece's collapse recently brought in the whole euro. Any kind of stock instability or speculation might bring down the currency, so it's kind of weak, kind of fragile, and we see a lot of turbulence with wars and stuff like that. So that could be what we're talking about here with the divided world. A lot of these times, these prophecies, we see them in retrospect, we're able to analyze them better than we would otherwise. Now we go on to the golden image, chapter 3, right? The oven, what I'm going to call this part. But King Nebuchadnezzar, again, he comes out and he makes a statue of gold. All right, this giant statue of him. And whenever they play the trumpets, whenever they play the drums, whenever they play the flutes and the bagpipes, everyone's supposed to kneel to this giant statue of Nebuchadnezzar, right? So what happens? Daniel gets elevated to being the leader of Babylon, supposedly, right? And now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are also leaders with him. Now, at this point, we see that some of these magicians, some of these people that are kind of the competition of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, snitch on him. And they say, hey, king, you said everyone has to kneel, but your little Jewish friends that are the leaders over there in Babylon, they're not kneeling. They're not submitting to the crown, right? So at this time, he gets really angry, and he tells them, hey, guys, you need to do it. Here's a second chance. He goes, we don't need any more chances. We're just not going to bow, because it's not in our religion to bow down to other idols, so we can't do it. So at this point, he gets really mad, and he goes, hey, you're done. So he burns this furnace up 7 times. 7 times higher than it's supposed to be, right? The guys that throw these 3 dudes in, they burn up and die because they're so close to the furnace. But at this point, Nebuchadnezzar is observing the furnace, and he sees 4 people, and he goes, hey guys, I put 3 in. The 2 guards died putting them in. They're still in there. They look great. And the 4th one appears to be the son of a god, like an angel or something. But at this point, they see that, and you kind of see Nebuchadnezzar realizing that this is the power of God, and he stands up. At this point, he is seen to stand up for the Jewish people and the Jewish God, recognize the Jewish God is above other gods. And at this point, he takes them out, and they look great. They don't even smell like smoke. Even though the guys that put them in are dead, they're fine. And this is when Nebuchadnezzar turns that leaf and is seen to understand that between this and the dreams, that God is on the side of the Hebrews. That it's a real God, legitimate power, and that's why in chapter 4 he actually goes to Daniel and he says, "Daniel, I have this dream." He called Daniel and said, "This is him." Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. So he's still recognizing that there's something special about Daniel, but he still believes that it's his gods that are in Daniel. This is Belteshazzar, chief of my magicians. I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and it's no mystery, and no mystery is difficult for you. Here is my dream. What Nebuchadnezzar sees is this crazy prophecy. He sees a tree. And this tree provides fruit and bounty, and it helps everyone. It's great. It's a great tree, and it gives everyone what they need, right? And then this tree is cut down. And a big band of iron is placed at the root, so that band of iron is taken out, the tree can now sprout. But the band of iron is kind of stopping it from growing. Very common practice in arbor. They are able to stop trees from growing and put them on different seasons. So now the tree is stopped from growing, and he sees that he turns into a wild man, and his mind is given up kind of to the more prime beast-like conditions. And Daniel says here, "Let him live with the animals along the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given to the mind of an animal." This happened supposedly in the dream for 7 years, that Nebuchadnezzar saw himself as an animal. Daniel says this to him, and he says, if you don't change your ways from being prideful, and you don't recognize that I gave you this, the Jewish God gave you this, you're going to turn into that wild man. At this point, one day, 7 years later, Nebuchadnezzar is sitting on the rooftop, and he sees his creation of Babylon. And he says, wow, look at this great thing I've built. And immediately then, the voice of the Lord tells him and says, hey, this is what the prophecy was. Boom. For 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar was pretty much a beast. You know, the Bible says that he was a beast in the wildlands. For 7 years, he's not able to think like a man thinks. He's a beast. After he realizes that God is sovereign and God is what gave him everything, he then becomes a regular person. He comes back here into the world. Now, this is not in the histories. This is just literally the biblical application of this story. Babylonian rule. So Nebuchadnezzar comes back after the 7 years, and now he's back to being a real person. Okay? And there the Bible kind of stops talking about him after chapter 4. And we get into the part in chapter 5 where Belshazzar is now the king. Now, Belshazzar isn't really the king. According to other sources, such as Dr. Bauer and other historical sources in kind of Persian record-keeping, Assyrian record-keeping, and the things that Cyrus finds out, we know that the king's succession goes from Amel-Marduk in 562, Marduk being the name of their god, so he's named after one of their gods. Not in the Bible, though. Neriglissar, okay, I am really bad at names, so that's probably wrong, but here we go. Neriglissar from 560 to 556, okay. Then Nabonidus. Nabonidus is really interesting because the sources tell us, primary sources tell us that Nabonidus was the king. And Nabonidus really didn't like being king very much. He'd actually go and excavate. So he liked more to go and find ruins of Babylonian ruins and Assyrian ruins and kind of say, what's that? And he'd go excavate. He was like an archaeologist. And he hated being the king, so he made Belteshazzar or Belshazzar the king. Belshazzar being his son. Okay, Belshazzar now king in 550 BCE. King. Daniel calls him the king, but it's really Nabonidus. Okay, and Belshazzar uses the temple instruments. Remember the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar stole back when he conquered Judah? Belshazzar uses these instruments in Daniel chapter 5 to kind of throw a party. So he's having a party, has a lot of the girls over, a lot of his friends over. They're drinking, they're doing stuff that's pretty bad, pagan stuff, right? And he brings out, during this great party, he brings out the Jewish golden cups and the Jewish plates and stuff that was in the temple, holy stuff. And he has a party with it. Immediately, a ghostly hand writes on the wall 4 words. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. So this ghostly hand writes, mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Pretend you're partying. And you see this giant, weird hand. Like, I'm really drunk, probably. And I'm seeing this hand and I'm freaking out. Now, what happens is that Belshazzar doesn't know what to do. And someone in the party says, hey, there's this guy who told your grandfather all of his visions and told him what they meant. Go call him. And that's when he calls Daniel. He calls Daniel back into the court, okay, to tell him this dream. And Daniel says in chapter 5, verse 26, here's what these words mean. Meaning, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and are found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. This is the first kind of record that we have in the Bible of him talking about the Mede and Persian Empire. Now, the Mede Empire, being the father-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, probably now some kind of relation to Belshazzar, is an empire already. The Persians are a small city of people who Cyrus the Great grew into being one of the greatest, most dominant forces in the Middle East. Probably in the Middle East still, a native force still wasn't, the Medo-Persian Empire was probably the biggest, or is the biggest empire to rule the Middle East unified probably since. Because after the Greek wars, the Greeks end up taking the Middle East. Then the Romans take that over later on after it collapses. And the Romans end up being the most dominant force, but a unified Arab Persian army had never happened. So if you look at what the Bible says, is different than what Herodotus and Xenophon says. So Herodotus says that Cyrus the Great routed a river into Babylon and took over Babylon. Made a giant river, routed it into the city, and took it over. Right? Xenophon says it was a surprise attack. They somehow went across the back, went through a gate, found a gatekeeper, and went in and killed him and kind of snuck into the city. And supposedly they had already conquered the city, and half the city didn't know. The city was so big. They had already taken the palace, and the rest of the city was still partying, right? But Daniel says that that same night, Belshazzar was killed by Darius. But here's the problem. Daniel says in chapter 1 that he served the court from Nebuchadnezzar to Cyrus. Then now it's saying that Darius killed Belshazzar, but Darius isn't even alive yet. So historically what happens is that Cyrus the Great leader and founder of the Persian Empire, takes over the Babylonian Empire and then conquers the Middle East. After him, he has a son named Cambyses II. And after him, the leader is Darius. And after him, his son Xerxes. Now, there's a bit of names that are misplaced here in the accounts. And that's why you have primary sources and you have secondary sources and you kind of collaborate and see what happens. But here in this case, I think Daniel's mistaken when he says that Darius kills Belshazzar. Darius isn't even around. It's actually supposed to be Cyrus I. It's both very well documented in that. But history at this point, so far back, so ancient, it's a mystery we even have any of it at all. And again, Herodotus, some people say that he embellishes some of his stories, but you don't really miss him, so you don't have him anymore. Because after Herodotus, no one else writes like Herodotus. So you kind of lose everything else that you have. So a lot of the ancient histories, Herodotus, Xenophon, and the Bible, what we gather. Then we have Persian records, Assyrian records, Babylonian records. But from this, here we go, we see the end of Babylonian rule, and we pick up part 3 with the beginning of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Thanks, guys. Tune in next week for part 3 in the series, and we'll cover the Persian kings. Thanks. Hey guys, thank you for joining me for the Ronnie Perez podcast from Daniel to Darius, episode 2. This is part 2 in a 3-part series. Join me next week for part number 3, where we go over the Persian kings. Hey, this means so much to me that you guys are joining in. Go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube page, like my Facebook page for more updates. Any kind of questions you might have, I'm happy to answer them. Have a great day, guys. Thanks.